Hello, and welcome to episode 6 of our read-through of The Lord of the Rings, The Old Forest, Chapter 6. In this chapter, we see the hobbits wake up early to leave Crickhollow, enter into the Old Forest on their way to the road to Bree. In the Old Forest, it is ominous and it is spooky. The trees dislike intruders, and the trees move to block the path of our company when they aren't being looked at. The hobbits eventually sit down to nap under a willow tree, and Merry and Pippin are actually swallowed into the trunk of the tree. Frodo, in a panic, runs out and yells, "Help! Help!" And out comes the weirdest character in the book, Tom Bombadil, who saves the hobbits by commanding the tree to let them go, and following this, he mysteriously leads them to his house. And that is Chapter 6.
He mysteriously leads them?
He does mysteriously lead them because they start to follow him, and then he kind of runs ahead, and then he's just kind of standing at the door with a golden beam of light, as he... I would say it's fairly mysterious.
Fair enough. His whole character, of course, is probably the most mysterious character in the entire book, and we'll probably talk more about him next chapter, but we'll definitely give him some discussion in this chapter as well. The amount of ink spilled about Tom Bombadil, both in print and digitally, is incredible. I mean, this is one of the most discussed characters, I think, in the entire book, and I don't know. I'm not sure if I'm looking forward to talking about him or if I'm dreading it, but here we are. Here we are. So let's get to it. But first, I guess let's actually talk about the chapter is called The Old Forest, and that's really the main. That's the heart of the chapter, more so than Tom Bombadil himself, who I think plays a bigger role in the next chapter. But my initial thoughts on this chapter and on the Old Forest are, one, this is actually when I get sort of frustrated with the geography of the book, because we talked about last chapter that we start to finally feel like, I need a map. I need to look at the Atlas of Middle-earth and figure out just where is Buckland and Crickhollow and these places. And then we get to the Old Forest, where there is no good map of it. You just have a sort of blob that's in the middle of these regions in all the maps we have. And there's no good indication for exactly where the hobbits are. And that's, I think, deliberate, right? Because they go into this forest and it's like a maze, and they end up just always being drawn to the strangest, most sort of surreal part of the forest, regardless of what they want to do. And so you're not really you're supposed to feel lost, right? You're not supposed to know where they are or where you are as a reader. So I get that that's deliberate, but I do get sometimes frustrated reading this chapter. Like, where are they exactly? Right. I don't know. They're just in the middle of this forest, and drive me a little crazy sometimes.
Yeah, I completely agree. I feel like, for the most part, when people complain about, the Lord of the Rings just being, it's just a bunch of hiking, or it's just a bunch of description of scenery, I, kind of roll my eyes a little bit. But, when I get to the Old Forest, I kind of like silently to myself think like, where are these hobbits?
Except they're not hiking.
Right, they aren't.
Up, though.
No, they're riding, or at least they're leading
this
the ponies.
Is one of the few chapters where they're riding on ponies instead of walking. So all these critics, they don't know what they're talking about. They didn't take into account chapter 6 where they are riding instead of walking. So, but I know what you mean. Yeah.
But let's talk about these woods, the Old Forest. It's really the first antagonist that they come face to face with, in a sense, because they have the Black Riders before, but they're really just trying to not interact with the Black Riders at all.
And they never, there's never a mutual recognition there, right?
Right.
There's never an instance where, at least where the Black Riders see them and they see them and they both see each other and can sort of interact.
There's like a little part where, Frodo sees one, crawling, but it's, and he has an idea that it saw him, but there's not like you said, it's not a mutual standoff. But these woods, they are actually, the woods themselves are a character in a way, or many characters if you like to think about it that way. They have their own will, and they hate these hobbits. They try to trip them. They try to throw branches at them.
Although I don't know. Like, well, I guess you're right that they hate them. This maybe isn't the best example, but I was thinking the whole time that this is less a case of like sheer antagonism, or I guess I mean to say the Old Forest is not evil, right?
Right.
And so I guess this isn't maybe the best example of this, but in general, throughout Tolkien, you see the sort of trope of places being not of places being perilous, which is different from places being evil. So Mordor, when they get there, is evil. That land is antagonistic to them, and it's just sheer evil. We'll get to places like Lorien, which is a much better example of this, I guess, than the Old Forest is, and places like Fangorn as well, where it's not evil, but it is perilous. It is dangerous. You can't really just go in there and expect to just sort of come out unscathed.
But yeah, I think, something on what you're saying. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, the Old Forest isn't maybe quite at those levels, because there is an antagonism here, I guess, of they would rather the hobbits be kicked out of the forest than be in it. But I guess maybe that recognition that they're not working for Sauron. There's no
Right.
evil in these woods. They don't want the hobbits gone because they hate good things. They just don't trust anything that isn't a tree. So
Well, I
they
think
want them out.
that's kind of an important part of what this chapter does. Is it sets up how there are other characters where Tolkien makes it very clear it is not just Sauron versus Gandalf and friends, and that's the whole world. It's very clear that there are characters that are the Eagles, for example, which are just wild beings that are not, it's not as simple as just good versus evil.
Yeah, it's like a more dynamic world where there isn't just two sides to this. There are several third parties to the conflict, right? And the Old Forest is one of them. Tom Bombadil's one of them, too. All these other agents in the world that don't really play a part in the bigger conflict. And, the characters have to sort of figure out what to do with them.
Well, let's see. Do we have much to say else about the role of the forest here before we move on to Mr. Bombadil?
Not before. That's all I have to say about the forest. I think, yeah, that's all I have to say about the forest. I think it's time. It's time. Let's deal with this. Tom Bombadil, what's the deal?
Okay, so I have a hot take on Tom Bombadil, so I want you to go first. How do you take this character?
How do I take this? I mean, that's a huge question, though. Like, this character is. I mean, for a character that's only in a couple of chapters, he is huge, and like his presence just sort of looms over the book. And it really does, because I mean they'll mention him in the Council of Elrond to be like, what if we give this to Tom Bombadil, and we'll have Gandalf toward the end of the book say like, I should go chat with Tom Bombadil. It's been a while since I've talked to Tom Bombadil, and I'd love to have a chat with him. I mean, he's always kind of there. And Frodo's in the chapter that's to come. Frodo will have a dream in Tom Bombadil's house that ends up being this like the single most important foreshadowing dream of the book. So he casts a large shadow, and it's such a can of worms to open up. Like, oh, what do you think of Tom Bombadil? And so I'm not quite sure where to start, at least not in this chapter. But
well, maybe I can ask you this. Let's talk about what we're not interested about in Tom Bombadil. Charlie,
oh yeah,
maybe you can take some of this because you've seen it, like online and in other discussions.
Yeah, I find the conversations that you see, like it seems that so many people who talk about Tolkien are more interested in figuring out where Bombadil fits in with the sort of cosmology of Tolkien's world, right? So which rank of deity is he? Kind of questions, and I don't find those conversations particularly interesting, to be honest, and because I don't think there's a good answer. It seems like he's just in here almost to throw a wrench in any of your sort of like designs of, oh, well, Middle Earth has to be very orderly, and everybody has to have a sort of rank in place.
You have a class, and you have a profession, and
yeah, and Bombadil is just not going to fit in there, I don't think. I think what's more interesting to me is what is the thematic purpose of Bombadil? Like, what's the message? Because, as I said, he casts a long shadow over this whole book, in a way. there's a point to him, right? And it's really hard to pick up what that point is, but I think it is there. Let me just say this, I guess. The first hint, I guess, to my take on Bombadil is this. We're introduced to him coming, like, just hopping along, as he does. And he's singing, right? And he sings his silly, goofy songs. My big takeaway, though, actually is less the song that he's just singing explicitly while he's hopping along, and more just, like, when he's talking to the hobbits, and they're talking to him. When he speaks in prose, it still sounds like he's singing. There's almost still a meter to it all that isn't quite like any other character in the book. And I think that's a big hint. Essentially, Tom Bombadil can't talk without singing, right?
Right.
So some of his first, let's see, actually I think his very first lines he says that aren't poems or songs, he says, "Now, my little fellows, where be you a-going to, puffing up like a bellows? What's the matter here, then? Do you know who I am? I'm Tom Bombadil. Tell me what's your trouble." And I think it kind of loses it at the end, but you could start to hear it as it goes. It sounds like a song in itself, in a way. And he continues, like, when he tells Old Man Willow to let go of Pippin, Old Man Willow, this tree, has swallowed Pippin, the hobbit, inside of him. And he says, "What be you a-thinking of? You should not be waking. Eat earth, dig deep, drink water, go to sleep. Bombadil is talking." Like, it sounds like a poem, even though it's not. And I'll have more thoughts on this next chapter, I think. But that, to me, is key, that Bombadil is connected in some way to song and music. What do you think about Bombadil?
Well, yeah, I guess I've been kind of building up, but here it is. Here's how I read Tom Bombadil. I see Bombadil as nature. And so what I mean is I don't think of him as trees and animals and plants and that sort of thing. I think more about him as the physics of the world, or just kind of the natural way that the world is. And kind of how I see this is that he, or at least something that supports that in my mind, is he always speaks in song, right? So something that you just mentioned is he can't stop from being involved in meter and in song. And we know that Middle-earth, its existence really, it is a song of its god, Iluvatar. And so the
Although
world
it's worth
itself,
mentioning, if you read this book, sorry,
you wouldn't know.
when it came out, you wouldn't have known.
You wouldn't know that, right?
Yeah.
But so I do see him as, involved in song in that way. I see his relationship with Goldberry as the relationship between the natural way the world is and how its relationship with life. I see Goldberry's kind of life being in the world, and sort of that their relationship as a relationship between, for lack of a better way to say it, of physics and life. And so when I'm reading things about Bombadil, I'm reading about Tolkien's attitude about how the natural order of the world is structured and how its relationship to life. Bombadil is some way uninterested. Well, I'll get more to that later, but that's just kind of how I'm starting it off.
Yeah, I think we should just start wrapping this up. Do you have a favorite line from this chapter?
I do. I like the very beginning. I think I get when the hobbits are waking up. It's like 6 a.m. and it's foggy and it's quiet. And there's a line here about the hobbits on their way out of Crick Hollow. The leaves of the trees were glistening, and every twig was dripping. The grass was gray with cold dew. Everything was still, and faraway noises seemed near and clear. Fowls chattering in a yard, someone closing a door of a distant house. And I just get a very clear image of being in that early morning before everyone else is awake, and every sound is just a very important moment.
Yeah, I always think Tolkien's is actually really good at describing the environment around people and really getting you in the scene. I think that's a great line. I had it underlined as well in my copy. My favorite line comes from a song, and it's not Tom Bombadil's song, so it's not Ring a Daldillo, so don't worry there. But there's a song Frodo sings when they enter the forest and the hobbits feel sort of lost. And it says, Frodo sings, "O wanderers in the shadowed land, despair not, for though dark they stand, all woods there be must end at last. And there's more to the song, but those 3 lines sort of stuck out to me. One thing that sticks out to me there is the Lord of the Rings seems to represent a worldview that we don't think about very often anymore in our modern context, but the worldview that forests are dangerous places. I think now in our sort of like post-romantic and national park world, we tend to just think of forests as just nice and pleasant, right? Just nice escapes from the city. But it's good to sometimes get that reminder of the pre-modern view of things where they were dangerous and they were awful. So I appreciate that little reminder sometimes to sort of respect the forest maybe a little bit more than I think we do in the modern world.
Well, okay, I think that about wraps it up for Chapter 6. Join us next time for Chapter 7, In the House of Tom Bombadil.
More Tom Bombadil. Okay.
More Tom Bombadil.
More Tom Bombadil. I love Tom. I'm sorry. I take that back.